All right, so first thing we're doing is we're using these kits that I made up, which basically it's just your two square leather pieces. This one is some cognac. This is actually some goat. We cut into squares, and when we cut these out, the thing to think about them is on the long side of it here, hide has a direction that it stretches in naturally. So leather, we cut it so that it's designed to stretch, I guess, in this direction rather than long ways. So when you're wrapping it around an antler, you want to take that stretch out of it in this direction. So the other thing is it needs to be cut square, and we'll cut those down to size on each one of them. As we cut them down, you're going to maintain that square shape. Some you think you might actually have to make them, slightly exactly to form, but we'll worry about that when we get to stretching. First thing we do before we get here is actually, here's an example. We're going to look at this one, taking these brow tines off. So how I usually do it is I either take a hacksaw or I've got a sawzall, and I'll just cut that thing, right on that line, right there, right back to the main beam, just like that. And once I've cut that off, you can either go at it with a sander. I've got a hand rasp. I'll do it with some on them, and then run it with a sander to take off if he's got any burrs or anything like that. But you still want to leave the burr on the bottom base of the antler. What you're really trying to do is get boogers like that off so you get a smooth surface all the way around the edge of it. So anyway, once you take that burr off, then we're going to start cutting the leather down and getting that ready to stitch. So we'll get to that part. All right, so now what we're going to start doing is trying to wrap these antlers. So on these square pieces, we're just getting them rough to size. Just wrap them on there. What we're trying to do is basically line up the first G2. We want our thread line to be right along that main beam, and then leaving room for where we're going to put our cord on there. So this just for sizing it up. So we're rolling it across there, seeing we've got all kinds of extra room, and it's also maybe a little bit longer than I'd like for the handle portion of it. So I'm going to take a little bit off of here to shorten it up, and then what I'll usually do is pull it tight to right there and look at that inside seam right there, and just mark that with your thumb so you got a little indentation right there at the top. You can do the same thing at the bottom just to see kind of where you're at. Like I say, this is just to get us close. So anyway, got that marked. Let's cut it down and see how it looks. All right, now that we got this thing marked, I always use a ruler. Like you can see, these aren't perfectly straight, but just to try and cut it right. So put that ruler across there, get your sharp knife, cut real slow so you get a consistent edge on there. If you go too fast, it'll start to ball up and will leave you some weird marks on there. All right, got that separated out. Do another test fit. So this is just, basically trial and error, bringing that thing down to size. What you're trying to do is get this to where there's actually about 1/4 of an inch gap, and that gap we're going to stitch up with the or we're going to actually pull out when we actually put the thread on there, and so that ensures that we got a good tight fit. So you can see we're still, you see it's got some large points where we're overhanging, so I'm actually going to take a little bit more off this edge, see how close we're going to get. So let's take a little bit more off this side. All right, so we just took a little bit off the top here, and then we shortened up this side a little bit. I just have like a rubber covering over the whole deal so I can cut on this surface without any issue, and also provides pretty good clean, you're cutting on a granite or something like that, so just make sure there's something soft underneath when you're cutting that leather. So let's do another size check real quick, see where we're at. So what we're trying to do is we want gap all the way along the middle. That's just not stretched all the way. So if we stretch that, you can see now we're talking. All right, so we kept that thing square all the way around. We're gonna leave this long, so you can see how that doesn't line up perfectly. It's actually hanging down. Don't go to cutting that off yet. We're gonna start and focus on is having those two sides leveled up. and maintaining that gap all the way around there shouldn't be an issue. We want to keep that gap so that when we stitch, we're going to pull it up together, and that's going to provide a nice clean tension on here. It's going to take a lot of the any of these bubbles out of there. So, all right, let's see what we got. So another thing, once we get one of these grips the way we like it, the size that we like it, feels good, looks pretty proportional to everything. I'll just use that as kind of a point of reference to check that other antler, because you know a lot of times these guys will have slightly different beams, but it's a good point of reference just to put it on there and see. So these G2s will be closer on some of them, so you got to make sure that that height's going to work out for both of them. So you can kind of see right there what that's going to look like, and it's going to get us pretty close. So you can use this size as kind of a starting point for that second handle, just like that. So we're going to do that for cutting this one out. We're going to start a little wide, and then we'll start narrowing it down. So it's just kind of a process. You don't want to cut too much. It's kind of hard to put these things back together. So, all right, let's cut her down. All right, so once we lay these up here on top of each other, just going to use this straight edge just to kind of get it down to size. So we're saying it's about where that one's at. Right down to there. Put your straight edge on top of that, and then I just take that one out from under it. Apply, you gotta have pressure evenly across all the way there. Take that X-Acto knife, real slow, real easy. Bring it all the way through. All right, we got our height set. Now we're gonna bring it over here and start looking at our width. All right. Roll out all those seams on there. Now I'm gonna bring it wide so that we can shave it back down to the exact antler. So you can see that wasn't cut exactly straight when I cut out the squares, but that's why we cut them large to start with. So as we're cutting them down, we can square everything up and make it more exact to the antler itself. All right, so now another thing I'll usually do is get on the back side, and you can either take one of your stitch punches or a Sharpie or whatever, and just mark the back of it with an R and an L so you can know which one was designed for which antler. Put it on there so you're not getting them mixed up. So you do have it exactly to the correct beam. Pro tip. All right, now you can see that one's way too big. We got to take some more off that one already, I can see. So you can see once you pull some of that tension out, it's going to start overlapping. So we need to take some of that out. All right. So just got to keep working it. Don't want to cut it too small because, man, it is tough to stretch them. I've had to cut them over and over before because I brought them down too small, and your stitch gap gets wonky, and then it's no good for anybody. So anyway, let's shave that sucker down. So we've been cutting down on this. One of the things you got to look at as you're getting closer is you're wanting to maintain that gap, but usually you're going to be wider down at the base and you're going to be narrow up at the top, so you're kind of having to almost bring the top of that hide in like that, and usually I'll just bring it in on one side. So for instance, keeping this side straight and just basically doing one, exaggerating for sake of the visual there, bringing that in slightly. So you can see we're maintaining a great gap all the way down. Once we get up to the top though, you can see how much narrower it is. So you can kind of mark, and you just got to mark it a little bit. Just kind of saying, okay, well, you know, we don't have any gap there. You want to have that gap, like we say, so you don't want to stitch this up. All right, so let's check this thing out again. See where we're at. So hold that side, rip her around. That's going to be a much better gap. I think that's going to work for us. So now we're going to start punching some holes in each side of this, and then we'll get closer to stitching. So got our left and right sides. Now let's see what we can do to start punching some holes. All right, to do the stitching, the easiest way I've found, so we ship our little rattling antler kits, come with this punch. So you just have the 2-prong punch, and this is usually like either you can get a 4 or 5 millimeter gap in between those hole punches. And what I'll do to set my gap, and what I found that works pretty much one of the easiest things to do is take that hole punch, put it on the inside edge of that leather, and run it along the edge, and you can kind of see it's going to leave us a little witness mark there. That witness mark is giving us the offset line. So you know, as we tapered the leather, you don't want to just put you can actually see, so if you put a straight edge on there, because our leather is curved to match basically how that comes around the antler, you don't want to necessarily do that because it's not going to be perfectly square. So what I found the easiest thing and makes it look the most consistent is we're just using the edge of this, you're running along there, you're creating that witness mark, and that's what's going to start it. So just run along there. You can do it a couple times. Now note, this is on the flesh side of the leather, so you're going to put that line on there on the flesh side. You're not going to want to do it on this side. You don't want to necessarily scar up the pretty side that you're going to be looking at. You just want to rough up that flesh side, give you a witness line. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. All right, now since I've got my witness line, what I'll go do is I've got that witness line all the way along the top here. Try and get to where it'll show up, but it probably didn't show up real well on the camera, but regardless, so we got that witness line there. I'll just go ahead and push. You know, on this one it's pretty easy. You can just push through, set that first hole, and you're just going to basically go along here and using each subsequent hole, use a hammer, boom, hit it, go to the next one. You're using that last hole, going to the next one, just following along that line, and you'll punch out that whole list. I've got, you know, a little longer one, makes it go quicker, and also it's nice because you can get a long straight line. So I just use that last punch section I have, roll it along that witness line, boom, 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 boom. What you want to do also, if you want to maintain a perfect stitch, is once you finish this one side, you want to get down, and we'll take another look at it here. Once we get down here, you want to make sure that there's about, don't do it till the end, but that there's about 1 stitch left of leather, so you have enough area to tie into at the bottom and it looks consistent. So we'll go ahead and punch this, and when we get down to the bottom, we'll take a look at that. All right, so we just punched this last section with the multi-prong here, got down to here, so we've got a little bit of gap down here. So what I can do is you can either just offset it in the other holes, and you can see that there's still a gap there at the bottom that looks really good. We're pretty good there. So, or if you're using just the 2-prong, you're going to come along here and you're going to want to go until you're leaving that about 1 distance, so you can measure right there and see you want to stop your last hole to be right there at that edge while still leaving room and not just overhanging, and then you don't have a good place to tie off to. So we're going to finish with the big tool. Go ahead and punch both these out, and then we'll get ready to stitch. Another thing just thought of as we're getting ready to the second side. So we finished this whole side. We started at this corner. What we want to do is make sure we start with that offset on the same side. So you want to make sure that we're using the gap. We're using that gap between those prongs to basically measure everything. You want to do that to set your first hole and then go down. So if the gap down here is slightly different, depending on that piece of leather, it doesn't show up down here, and we have a consistent starting point, because we have some room to play. Once we get down to the bottom, we have some room to adjust. So we'll get started. All right, so awesome. We got both these things punched out and ready to go. I got all our thread right here. It usually takes, for each side, I cut about 3.5 feet of line, and that's usually enough to get us there. So I'm using like this wax covered. It's from, where's this out of? Maine Thread Company, that's who it is. These guys are awesome, made in the USA thread. So anyway, one of the cool things about doing this, so threading these needles on, thread it through, and then bring your thread back through there, so you actually thread that piece on there, run it back over, then your thread's not going to come off. You're not going to lose your needles while you're working on this. So go ahead and do that for both sides, and we'll be ready to rock. All right, so what we're going to do, got our thread, needles on both ends, come up over here You're getting this thing lined up. So basically what I usually do, so I'm gonna go find through that top hole, run it all the way through just one side, take that same side, goodness gracious, what are we doing here? Run it through again. So now what we're looking at, to get it all the way pulled through, so both these needles, you just have one side through each, and then what we're gonna do is kind of position everything to get it the way we like it. So we're kind of trying to get it a good starting spot. This is where you start positioning where that leather is gonna ride, so we know what we're looking for. So we know we've got enough room down here for mounting our strap in between, and then but good enough where we can get a good grip on everything. So I think that's going to be pretty close to where we need to be. Now, starting that. So when we're starting the stitch, so what I like to do, if you're trying to be rather specific here, is you're going to take the outside, come over. Those things are hard to see when you're looking at through here. All right, so we're gonna go over and through with that first one. Oop, try and get it all cleaned up on there. And then what you're gonna do is take the opposite side, go through the next hole. Oop. If you're trying to get this X, what you want to do is, however you're going to do that, you got to do it the same way every time. So pulling that out, what we're trying to do is see what that X is starting out to look like. We're taking that slack out of the hide, and so we have this. That's what our first X stitch is going to look like. So I started working down a couple of these extra stitches just so I could get this thing secure. Trying to do it with not enough hands and trying to video it all at the same time. It was giving me fits. So anyway, basically run about 3 or 4 stitches down here. Now you can see both stitches are coming out underneath the hide. So you're crossing every time, you're just going across. So as we're going across, I've got the thread from the left hand side coming to the right, so I'm going to go up into the right hand hole, up and through. Going to roll that out. Oh, my little beautiful stand just giving away. Come on now. Then the opposite side, so the side coming from the right going to the left, just going out that opposite hole, pulling it through. So once again, now we're to the outside. So now, since we've already got some threads laid here, what we're trying to make sure we're doing is making every one of them consistent. So on this one, I'm making this side the top thread and this side the bottom thread. So whichever is the bottom side, you're doing that side first. So I'll bring this one over the top from left to right, going into the next hole. This is a new hole, so not this one down from this one. Going through it, pulling through, then running the one from right to left, going across the top. So that's going to make my top stitch. Gotta kind of bring this one over the top. You're going to pull both those down, and there you go, just cinching it up. And what you do as you go down is just maintaining that tension, and you also want to press that hide down to make sure you're keeping that crease uniform as you go down, and tension on that crease as you go and pull around, because every antler is different. So as you're trying to make sure you're pulling that slack out, make sure you don't have any wrinkles coming in as you do it. I usually do this in my lap. I'll turn it around, set it on my leg, and then I can just fly down here and get down to the bottom. So once we get down to the base here, we'll show you what we're going to do on that portion of it. All right, look at this, man, coming out good. So you see there's the bumps in there. There's just some of the character of the antler left under there, but all the rough stuff's taken out. There's really no binding or bunching up of the leather on there. And I did what I said not to do. I didn't keep track of my count there, so I wound up with an extra there's an extra hole there. So basically what we'll do is we're gonna stitch these two right here, and then we're gonna leave this thread out, and we're gonna match everything up so we make sure that we've tied off the same as we go. And before you tie it off, what we'll do also, so you can go back through and use your needle and pull that top thread all the way down as you go. So you're taking out, as you stitch, this stuff's gonna stretch a little bit. You can go back through, pull all that stretch material out, make sure that you have a good strong grip, no stretch. There's no gaps that are gonna come in later down the road as this thing stretches out and starts to move. So you can go all the way down, pull all that tension out. Both sides, the top stitch, which is going this direction, and then under stitch, which is going that direction. But anyway, we'll finish up this one, start working, do the same thing for this one, and we'll wait to tie off both ends once we get there. So, all right, another point to consider. So we got this one, I just took the needles off there, so the wind is blowing those garage doors. So I just rolled up both those ends. So you want to compare, so basically match up both antlers to make sure that you're setting the same angle based off of that G2, and then the same ending point, so you have consistency there. So that's, you just want to double check that you're going to have a consistent layout, because these things are so different and every single antler is different. So just make sure you've got it lined out and they're going to look as consistent as possible, even with all the variability these dadgum things have. So anyway, I think we're off to a pretty good start right there. So I'll stitch this one up and we'll be right back. All right, so once we get this thing all the way stitched up, so basically we're running it through, that's our last stitch right there. We're gonna come up and over. So basically crossing these two, just like that, to end it off. So what we wanna do is match it up to that, so we have that X's all the way down and then straight across at the bottom. So that last one right there, take the left side, go into the right side, pull that over, try to keep things from getting all clumped up here. Same to the other side, opposite side, boom. There it is. So then, once you get everything stitched up again, and I already did this on this one, you go through with a needle or nail or something else and you pull all that slack out of each one of these. So as that stretches, you just take all that stretch out of there, bring it all the way down to the bottom, cinch it up at the bottom. And once you have that cinched up at the bottom, you take this crossed, and we'll flip it this direction. And we're basically gonna do square knots, or usually 2 or 3 knots on there to cinch this thing down, and then we'll burn off the end, and then we'll stick that tag end back under the handle after it's burned. You kind of flatten it, and then you can take a little scrap piece of leather on top and take like a little hammer and just dull that knot down. And then we'll also put a little dab of glue there to make sure that that thing never comes unraveled. So now we'll cut these 2 tag ends off and then burn it. Actually, you know what I usually do too is roll this a little bit. Just twirl it so that wax all sticks together. So when I actually go to cut it or go to burn it back, it keeps it all together. So it's like just burning one little piece. Get that thing nice and hot. Go in there, flatten that thing together so then that lays nice and flat, and you can tuck it back up under there, put your glue on it, and we're not going to have an issue with this thing coming apart. Again, you just use your needle or a nail, or I got these little awls you can use, and then And just tuck it all the way back up under the seam. There we go. And then we'll get to trimming the top and the bottom too. So you want to do the trimming before you do the gluing so it's not necessarily sticking too bad. The leather sticking to the antler, but we'll do that here in a sec.